All right. Well, so thank you everyone for being here today. I know that sometimes it's a bit difficult, to take some time out of your very busy schedule. And well, let's begin talking about what, we have for today, which is developing listening skills at B2 level, right? So first of all, the materials used for this presentation were taken from these places, these sources. Towards the end of the presentation, I'll be sharing these links with you, if you would like to continue reading about these things. And these are our session aims, right, for today. First of all, we're going to identify what makes listening challenging for students. Then we're going to identify what is expected from B2 students in the listening paper. And then we're going to discuss some activities, strategies, and techniques that can help students deal with such challenges, right? So more often than not, whenever we tell students, okay, we're going to do a listening, activity or a listening test or something, sometimes some of them feel like this. Maybe, they don't show it, but sometimes on the inside, they feel like this, right? So, how do we go from this to, students feeling like this, right? Maybe this is an exaggeration, but, how do we help them feel a bit more relaxed, right? When they have to face a listening activity or a listening task or a listening test, right? So let's first begin by talking about what makes listening challenging. First of all, we all know it's a complex process. It requires real-time processing. It's not like reading where you can stop reading, go back, read again, right? You can't see the speaker unless you're watching a video, right? You can't see the speaker. So we don't have the body language, the expressions, right? The face expressions, right? So that, poses a challenge as well, right? Sometimes the person who is listening has the wrong focus or the wrong purpose for listening or the wrong strategy, right? Sometimes they, think that they need to understand everything the person is saying, right? Another challenge, right, is the speaker's pronunciation or pace, right? The segmental and suprasegmental features. When we think of segmental features, we think of individual sounds, right? And the suprasegmental features are stress, intonation, rhythm, connected speech, right? So all those things, of course, play a big part in this challenge, right? That, listening poses to students. Affective filters, those emotional barriers, right? That anxiety that students have, right? Makes, students tune out. I don't know about you, but I remember having students that, they start listening and they get lost very quickly and they say, oh, don't understand anything, right? Or sometimes they say, oh, they speak with a potato in their mouth. I don't understand anything, right? So, those affective filters or emotional barriers make students tune out and, stop paying attention. Sometimes cultural or background knowledge, right? The topics that they are talking about in this listening texts, right? Sometimes a lack of context, when students don't pay attention to the context in which this, conversation or monologue or whatever it is they are listening to takes place. Also the grammatical and lexical range, right? The variety of structures and, vocabulary that the listener has, right? But also the density of the listening text, right? Sometimes, there are materials that have many new grammatical grammatical structures or unknown vocabulary, right? So that makes it also, you know, a bit more challenging to students. And then also the organization of spoken language, right? Spoken language is quite different from written language, right? And sometimes students, you know, have trouble, you know, following that. So let's talk a little bit about that. The characteristics of spoken language is usually unplanned, right? It has hesitation, yes, repeats, fillers, right? It also has many colloquialisms, right? It also has many reduced forms, you know. The students sometimes expect people to hear say things like, I'm going to go to the, right? It, you know, people don't speak like that, right? Connected speech, you know, sometimes you hear things like, do you like pizza? And students expect to hear, do you like pizza, right? Rhythm is also something that poses challenges, you know, that English is a stress-timed language, unlike Spanish, right? That is a syllable-timed language. What does that mean? That in Spanish, that is a syllable-timed language, right? The more syllables we have in a sentence, the longer it takes for us to say the sentence. Whereas in English, we think of the stress syllables that we have, right? So for example, if I show you these 3 sentences, right? What do they have in common? Look at the 3 sentences. What do they seem to have in common?
Subject, the object.
There are, right, certain words, very good, that appear in the 3 of them, right? And what's different? Do they have the same number of words?
No.
No, right? No. But since English is a stress-timed language, and these 3 sentences share the stressed syllables, right? In this case, we have cows eat grass. Here again, cows eat grass, and here cows, well, we have eating, but you don't say eating, you say eating, right? And grass. These 3 sentences will take approximately the same time because we have unstressed words. So listen to this. Do you hear if I do this on my table? Do you hear me tapping? Yes, you do. Right. So if you say cows eat grass, the cows eat the grass. The cows have been eating the grass. It's the same rhythm, right? Cows eat grass. The cows eat the grass. The cows have been eating the grass. As you can see, these words, the, right, or have been, or the again here, are like sort of squeezed between the stressed words, right? Sometimes when students say, but I don't understand what the person says, or I didn't hear that, sometimes it's because those words are unstressed. And this is what, you know, what we use in English to convey meaning. Stress and unstress exist relative to each other. And this contrast is what helps people convey meaning, right? And this is what happens when we think of course, not just speaking, but also listening, right? When students expect the other person, you know, speaking on the recording, say, the cows have been eating the grass. If they expect to hear that, right, they are in for, you know, disappointment, because that's not what they will hear. People will say the cows. They won't say the cows, unless you want to say something, you know, in particular, right? Or nobody will say the cows have been eating the grass, unless you want to say something in particular. For example, let's imagine Caro has some cows, right? And she's a bit worried because her cows don't seem to be eating, right? And, you know, I've just seen them and say, don't worry, Caro, the cows have been eating the grass. Now relax, it's fine, right? But that's because I want to convey a certain meaning, right? But we would not tend to stress those words, right? So this poses challenges to students, right? And this is what we should, you know, expose them to, right? To make sure that this is what they can expect, right? Now, moving on. What is expected from B2 students?
Sorry, Veronica,
Yes,
may
hello,
I
Daniel.
interrupt?
Yes, of
Hello,
course.
everyone.
Of course.
Allophones are also sometimes very, very distracting, you know, and they are disturbing to some point, you know, because you have Australian saying piper instead of saying paper. So when you get this, when you get to this, well, they really feel like, you know,
oh my God, what is that person
yes,
saying? Right,
quitting,
absolutely.
yes.
Yes, absolutely.
So,
And sorry, Daniel, go ahead.
Sorry, no, I was going to say that we have to make sure that they have exposure to different varieties of English, so in order to, you know, be able to adjust to these, you know, variations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, thank you for that, because that is very, very important. Yes, and especially at those levels when they are exposed to these kind of accents and different, you know, varieties of English, right? Because those things will also pose these challenges to students. Yes, absolutely. Right. So what is expected from students? I know you all know this, but I thought it would be a good idea to go over this very quickly. You know that in the listening paper in B2 First or B2 First for schools, they have part 1, 8 questions, multiple choice. The focus here is on listening for gist, yes, general ideas, detail, function, purpose, attitude, topic, opinion, genre, agreement between speakers, right, in a series of unrelated short texts. What seems to be the biggest challenge here? That candidates sometimes are distracted because they hear words or phrases that, you know, appear in the other options. So sometimes they hear that word and say, okay, it's this one, and then they tune out, right? Then in part 2, we have 10 questions, right? The sentence completion, right? This tests candidates' ability to locate specific information, right? They focus on opinions, right? They have, you know, a single text, right? And they have to produce written answers, right? By completing gapped sentences. The biggest challenge here seems to be that answers, first of all, will not be more than 3 words, right? And that these words or numbers or phrases they will need are heard on the recording, and they do not need to change those words, right? Sometimes they feel tempted to make some changes, right? And that's where, you know, they are bound to make mistakes, right? Now, we have part 3, right? We have 5 questions, multiple matching, right? And here the focus is on listening again for gist, detail, attitude, opinion, feeling, right? And they have to match an option to the correct speaker. What's the main challenge here? First of all, that the recordings are all related in some way. So it's not that, you know, they are talking about completely different things. And sometimes they make a decision too fast and, you know, they use up an option that belongs to another speaker and then they forget about that one, right? And, you know, that's also a problem that sometimes they have. And then in part 4, you know, the last part, we have 7 questions, multiple choice, and it's quite similar in the sense that, you know, they have different options to choose from, and similar to part 1. And in this case, they focus on, again, opinion, attitude, gist, main idea, and specific information. And of course, the biggest challenge here is, again, being distracted, right, by words or phrases that appear in the incorrect options. And something that, of course, I know you know, but it's important to you know, tell students is that the questions always follow the order of the interaction on the recording, right? That's very important as well. So the more aware we are of all this, and when I say we, I'm talking about, you know, teachers, students, right? The more we can help, you know, students, or the better equipped they will be to deal with these challenges, right? So, you know, more strategies, more awareness, more and better, right, comprehension, yeah? Another thing that's it's very, very important, and I know you will all agree with me on this, is that when we're teaching exams, right? In this case, well, B2 first, or first for schools, or even, you know, business Vantage, right? We should always integrate teaching, learning, and assessment, right? So that we can use the classroom as a lab in which we develop skills, right? And we are not just practicing or testing. Yeah, and this is something that, you know, with my students, we would always have this kind of conversation, because sometimes students are under this impression that, you know, okay, I need to do 70 practice tests, right? So it's not a question of quantity, right? It's a question of quality, of what you do with that practice test, right? Or what you do with, I don't know, the mock, or right? So of course, in the exam, students will not have time to do all these things that we're going to talk about today. But if we think of the classroom as a lab in which, you know, we develop skills, right? They will be better equipped, you know, to face the exam, right? And they will be more confident, they will be more fluent or competent listeners in this case, right? So it's really not time that we're wasting, it's time that we're investing in this development, right? So I think this concept of using the classroom as a lab is a very important concept to discuss with students, right? Especially when they are under that impression that I need more practices, I need more practice tests, right? Right. So before we move on, I thought it would be important to discuss the stages of a listening lesson, right? You know that we have like 3 big stages, right? This could be, I don't know, within the same lesson, or maybe it's just a part of the lesson, right? We have the before listening stage, in which we will build confidence, help students get ready for their first encounter with the listening text, arouse interest, predict, yes, the topic or the ideas that they will be, you know, listening to, right? Activate schemata, you know, that prior knowledge, right, that they have, that acts as a kind of landing pad, let's say, right? Activate schemata, activate vocabulary, maybe even pre-teach some vocabulary, right? So as to remove the barriers, you know, that they may find in the listening text, and also discuss what is expected in the listening tasks, right? You know, what are you expected to pay attention to in this part of the exam? Do you have to do this or that, right? What is important to make sure that, as you can see in the before listening, right, that we prepare students, yes, for what's coming next. Mm-hmm. Then we will have the while listening, when students are, you know, manipulating in a way the listening text, right? So they are dealing with the task or the tasks, right? Where we will discuss strategies that match the purpose for listening, right? The different parts have different purposes for listening, and it's very, very important that students are aware of that so that they can implement the appropriate strategy. And then in the while listening, we will also do some reflection, you know, reflecting on the strategies they used, if they were successful or not. Would you like to make any sort of changes next time we do this part of the test? Would you like to approach this differently next time, right? And then we have the after listening, right? Once students have finished, you know, dealing with the listening text, let's say, right, in which they will have some kind of personal reaction to what they have listened to, right? Maybe you integrate it or you integrate other skills, right? Ideally connected to their exam or not, it all depends on what your aims are. Right, but this is what, you know, a typical listening lesson, right, will look like. So let's discuss then.
Sorry, Vero.
Yes,
just adding something to what you mentioned before. This thing that we don't need 117 practice tests, because students usually work on practice tests as crosswords in a newspaper. So these things that you mentioned, before listening, while listening, after listening, I think that it's super important to have this in mind, because this aspect of the after listening, trying to connect it with something related to the exam, something about speaking, for example, it's something that, I don't know, we don't usually do. And it's important to reflect on this. Sorry for the interruption.
No, thank you. That is not at all. That's very, very important. And it's good that you said we don't usually do this. And it's true. We sometimes forget about this. That's why I was talking about this concept earlier of seeing the classroom as a lab. And sometimes even students say, oh, but why are we doing this? We're not going to do this in the exam, right? So that this is seeing things or seeing the exam, from a different perspective, right? Because it's okay, all the things we're doing now will help you to feel more confident, to be better equipped to deal with the exam, right? And I always tell my students, okay, nobody runs a marathon, and they wake up one day and they say, oh, I'll run a marathon today. So I'm ready for the 42 kilometers, right? You have to train so that then you're ready for race day, let's say, right? So it's the same thing, right? Thank you, Tere, for that comment. Let's have a look at some of these, activities, strategies, and techniques that we can do, right? With this concept in mind, developing versus practicing listening skills, right? When we practice listening skills, it would be basically, right, just, doing the listening test or practice test or exam, well, not exam, but mock, right? Or just doing the listening activity. And on the other hand, when we develop listening skills, right, we have all these things in mind that we were, talking about. So before we do that, I thought it would be a good idea to discuss the main subskills, right, of listening, as we said when we were going over the different parts of the exam. You could see that there were like different things that students had to focus on, right? When we think of the main subskills of listening, we think of predicting, we think of listening for gist or general, right, ideas, general understanding, listening for specific information, listening for detail or detailed understanding, and then listening or inferring attitude, feeling, mood, right? And it's very important that we, talk about these things with students so that they are aware of what is expected from them, right? So that then we can take that next step and think of what strategies are more suitable for these purposes, right? Or for these, subskills. So for example, I have a question for you. While you were waiting for this webinar to begin, right? Which of these subskills were you using? You were thinking, Verónica will probably talk about this and that, and maybe let's see if, what were you, right? Yes, you were predicting. So even if it's not, a subskill that you will use like exactly when you're listening, right? When you're listening, you will be sort of confirming, right? Or checking your predictions, right? But we always do this, yes? Then you're listening to the news, I don't know, on TV or on the radio, your phone, whatever you use to listen, to the news, while cooking dinner, right? The TV or the computer is there. What listening subskill are we using? What are you paying attention to?
For the gist.
Exactly, right?
Unless I have a purpose, I have an aim, like I want to listen to the weather for tomorrow.
Excellent, very good, very good. Unless you have a specific purpose, right? Like, okay, I want to know what the weather will be like tomorrow, or I want to know what happened with something, right? But if not, you're listening for gist, big ideas, general ideas, right? Now, you're at the airport about to take your flight, right? And you need to know which gate to go to. Are you going to listen to everything that person, speaking at the airport says?
No.
If imagine you're traveling to London, right? I don't know if we can do that now, but okay, let's imagine, right? We're traveling to London. When are you going to start paying more attention to that person? When you hear?
Something that is connected to that. Either England, London, UK.
Exactly.
The airline.
Right. Or exactly. When you hear those keywords, or you hear the word now London, right, you will pay more attention, right? So there we are listening for specific information, right? There's some okay, you were writing in the chat box. Very good. Yeah, about departure time, destination. Very good. Very good. Right. Right. Then imagine this other situation. You're a police officer and you're listening to a witness statement, right? Will you have to pay attention to, big ideas, big things, or will you need to
listen for detail?
Exactly. You need to pay attention to everything, right? That would be detailed understanding, right? Maybe you are, I don't know, in a class and you're, that example could be a bit tricky, but let's say that you're in a class and you're very interested and you want to, take notes and learn everything, right? So you're listening for detail or detailed understanding, right? And then think of this other situation. You're listening to a friend of yours, right? Talking about how he think he did in an exam, and he's constantly using words like sort of, maybe, yeah. And you also notice a rising intonation, at the end of some of his sentences, right? I think I did well, or I think I understood that question, right? With a rising intonation. What are we listening for? What are we using here?
Checking, asking for confirmation.
Right. Yes, thinking of attitude and feeling, right? And mood. Yes. So you're sort of inferring these things, but using, right, certain cues that will help you discover, let's say, or infer attitude or feeling or mood, right? Good. Now, another thing we need to discuss when we think of listening, right? And we think of, strategies and things of that sort, is what we call bottom-up processing and top-down processing, right? If we think of this funnel or a pyramid, right? If we first think of general ideas or big things, right? We would be doing what we call top-down processing. That is when we go from the most general, right, to the most specific, right? From big things, right? We start from big things. On the other hand, if we focus on the small things, right, and then we go up, right, that is what we call bottom-up processing, right? These are two processes that we do in English, in Spanish, in any language, in real life, right? Depending on the purpose we have for listening, depending on what it is that we need to listen for, we will, automatically go to one or the other, right? But we usually use a combination of both, right? To arrive at meaning, yes? Now, when we think of these top-down and bottom-up processes, when we think of bottom-up processes, yes, we are using linguistic cues to build meaning. We're focusing on the small things. We're focusing on, for example, sounds to identify, right, the boundaries of a word, yes? For example, when we look at the trees instead of the forest, right? We're looking at details. We're focusing on the small things. when instead of focusing on the small things, we focus on the big things, we are using contextual clues and our world or background knowledge to build meaning. We are not using bottom-up processes, we're using top-down processes. We're focusing on the big things. We're focusing on the forest, right, instead of the trees. Yeah. And as I said before, we use both to arrive at the meaning of the input, right, of what we're listening to in this case. Yes. And we do these things all the time, right? And sometimes, yes, thinking of these subskills we were talking about, or thinking of these processes, sometimes, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but sometimes students say, okay, what is there to be learned when it comes to listening? What do I have to learn, right? There's nothing to learn. I have, you know, a pair of ears, I can hear well, I listen to people all the time in Spanish, so what is it for me to learn, right? And this is, you know, this, we need to debunk this myth, let's say, because listening can be learned, and just because they can listen, you know, and they can use this top down and bottom up processes, or they use these sub skills in their mother tongue, it doesn't necessarily mean that they can transfer these things to their, you know, to this foreign language, right? Sophie, maybe you can turn off the microphones, and you know, if you want to say something, just of course feel free to turn it on, right? So that we don't have, you know, some background. There, but again, please feel free to, you know, unmute yourselves and speak. Right. So moving on. Yes. What activities or what strategies can we use then in the classroom, using the classroom as a lab to develop, yes, listening skills? First of all, we should always, as we said earlier, activate schemata, right? Activate this prior knowledge, right? In a warm-up, yes? So that we can get students ready. We can ease them into the topic, in this case of the listening text, right? Set the context, yeah? Encourage predictions, you know, in terms of the setting of that, I don't know, conversation or monologue or whatever, right? Encourage predictions in terms of the participants, the roles, the relationships, right? Predicting is a strategy that prepares students to listen and to understand better. And as we said some minutes ago, we are always predicting, trying to anticipate what it is that we will be, you know, listening to in this case, right? So how can we do this in class? By doing two very simple things. And I'm sure you all know this, right? Asking students to highlight keywords, for example, in the questions, right? Asking students to anticipate vocabulary, right, before they listen, right? You know, okay, what kind of vocabulary do you think you're going to hear? What kind of ideas, right, do you expect to hear? Yeah, because this gives learners, right, a clear picture of what to look for, right? This, as I was saying earlier, this equips them better, right, or gets them ready to listen and to understand better. Let me give you an example from the B2 First handbook, right, one of the sample papers you have there, right? For instance, this is what, you know, something very simple that you could do with students. I chose in this case question 2 from part 1, but you know, you can do this for any question, right? Remember, part 1 has these independent mini conversations, right? So this is the question. You hear two people talking about a water sports center, right? So this is what I would do with my students, right? First, before they listen, remember, we are preparing them, right? What words come to your mind when you think of water sports, right? So you brainstorm vocabulary, right? Maybe remember what we said, you could even pre-teach some vocabulary that will act as a kind of barrier, right? In the listening text. Then which are the key words in this question, right? What is it that you have to pay attention to, right? I would expect them to, highlight or underline, right? These words, maybe also, well, water sports center, right? And then what words do you expect to hear, right? If we're, I don't know, for example, they will be talking about water sports center and these are the options you have, right? What words do you expect to hear in terms of, I don't know, equipment, activities for small children, safety, right? So you brainstorm ideas. And with all this, what are you doing? You are activating schemata, right? You are, well, maybe doing a pre-teaching of vocabulary. You are activating vocabulary, right? You are helping students predict. And
Veronica,
yes,
may I say something?
Of
Elizabeth
course.
here. Now,
Yes.
that I think what I always do mostly instinctively, I think, is in class, make them, for example, produce synonyms and antonyms for words. For example, here could be safety, security, small children, toddlers, equipment needed could be swimming gear or something like that,
Right.
Or for example, likely, probable, almost, nearly, because
Excellent.
I feel that they have to be able to, when they hear, try to relate the words they hear to the words in the questions. And sometimes if they are used to finding synonyms and antonyms, it's really very useful for them.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, thank you, Eli. Yes, exactly, because that gets them more prepared, right, for what's coming. Yeah, very good. And as I was saying earlier, right, of course they will not have all this time to do all this brainstorming in the exam, right? But this, in a way, helps them, I don't know, paves the way, right? And gives them more tools to face, right, the time of the exam, right? And some of them will even maybe, I don't know, unconsciously or maybe more consciously, I don't know, do this kind of exercise very, very quickly, right? On the day of the exam, I mean. Right. Something similar that we can do, but for instance, in this case, part 2, right, there's specific details, situation. Sorry, I'm trying to read what you have written in the chat, checking for aspects, right? Very good. Paraphrasing, yeah, this is exactly what Ellie was saying, right? It will help them, right, with the task, right? Absolutely, absolutely. Right, so what we can do something similar in part 2, for instance, right? I'm sure you know all these tasks by heart, right? If you've been teaching, this level for quite some time. For instance, this is part 2, and something that I wanted to draw your attention to is, if you look at the tasks, they always have a very, very brief, introduction to the context. In this case, you will hear a woman who works for a wildlife organization talking about the spectacled bear, right? So you have a context there, right? And that's not, done randomly. Yes, this has a purpose, and the purpose is to in a way set the context, right, for students to sort of be more prepared for this first encounter with the text. So how can we exploit this if we want to, as we were saying, if we want to develop, right, these strategies? Well, what are spectacled bears? What do you know about them, right? And any other kind of, brainstorming that you can think of, right? Then again, which are the key words, right, in the question, right? And then something that you can do that is very, very useful, thinking of these predictions, is this. What kind of word should you write in the gaps? Yes, so you ask students to, you know, after you ask them to underline or highlight the key words. Okay, think of what kind of word or what kind of information you would need, you know, for each gap. So for instance, if we look at the first sentence, right, number 9 here, Angela says that it was the of the spectacled bear that first interested her. What kind of word could we expect? Got something in the chat. The form of words expected from the previous text and the following text. Very good. Yes, medium. What part of speech? Absolutely. That helps a lot.
What I have found is that many times we have to help them in analyzing the text in the terms of finding nouns, verbs, adverbs, because in Spanish, they really are not used to doing that. Yes.
Absolutely.
And for example, in number 11 here in the speckled bears,
yeah,
I would tell them, okay, perhaps you need nothing. And so when you need nothing, it's usually an adverb or an adjective, for example.
Right.
So that's things that help them. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. And it helps them a great deal, right? Not only for listening, also for their use of English, you know, for that exercise in which the word formation, right? Yes. And so, and this helps them a lot, right? So for instance, what we could expect students to come up with, well, here, a special feature, right? That first interested her, right? Or, you know, number 10, a part of the body, right? Or as you were saying, Ellie, or somebody else was saying in the chat box, a noun, right?
Here, and also, Veronica,
yes,
make sure they read it again, because sometimes they write it down and then it doesn't make sense.
Absolutely.
Or they repeat the word, right?
Exactly, because that's very, very important, right? Once they have finished, right, listening and filling in, you know, the sentences, encourage them to read again. Yeah, I would always tell my students, well, you know, sometimes they make these silly mistakes because they, I don't know, they wrote an extra word that then if they had read it, they would have realized, right? And I would always tell my students, okay, this is a mark that you're donating to Cambridge, you know, because, you know, that one could have been avoided. So yeah, that's very important.
May I interrupt to say
yes,
something?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Something I have seen is that sometimes they do underline the keywords, but they don't pay attention to the logic in the language that has been used to produce the question. So they don't identify contrast, they don't identify addition of information, and this is, you know, it's a shame, because you get good students that really have good listening skills, but because they did not read the question carefully, they are not able to produce the correct answer because they did not understand the question. Right. So this requires, in my experience, a fast reading training, you know, because they really have no more than 45 seconds and 1 minute to read the tasks. And I think that this is what we could call, you know, silly mistakes. Yes. They are not silly because, in fact,
they're not silly,
but you know, we can sell them this idea that the mistake was not very serious.
Right.
Yeah. But
okay. Veronica, something else I tell them to do is, sometimes they hear something which they know is the information they need, but they can't make sense of it. Yeah. Right. So I just say, okay, you write down, what you think you are listening, you are hearing. Yeah. And then with time, you can go back and try to make sense of something which could fit in in the blank, yeah? Because sometimes they are nervous and they don't remember the word, but they say, okay, I hear something like, okay, write it down. And then you go back, yes, and you can perhaps make sense of it or find something appropriate.
Appropriate, yes, absolutely, absolutely, yeah. We will talk about a couple of those things, you know, in some minutes, because it's true what both of you were saying, and I can see in the chat box here a common error, right, is that sometimes they miss, you know, certain things because they are not used to paraphrasing, right, or expecting other words. Yeah, so absolutely, absolutely. So doing all this, you know, of helping them identify keywords, anticipate vocabulary or ideas, thinking of paraphrases, right, as you were saying, predicting or anticipating the kind of information they need to complete the gap, right, that helps them, you know, stand a better chance, let's say, right?
Yeah, and for example, in number 10, as they have as well as, which is used for addition, they should expect something similar to what follows, yeah, exactly. Or if there is suppose something you use for contrast, a connector of contrast, okay, then you know, they know that what they need is something which is different or the opposite of what follows.
Exactly. So as you can see, this is sort of it's a way of analyzing, in this case, the sentences and the gaps, right, in detail. Yes, so that they are more aware of what they should pay attention to, right, and what they should be listening for. So it's not just, okay, I play the recording, I press play and you just listen. Right, yeah, thank you for those comments. What other things? We were focusing now on these activation of schemata, vocabulary, predicting, anticipating, right? What other things can we do? Remind students of their purpose for listening, right? What it is exactly that they have to pay attention to. What strategies match these purposes, right? How exactly are we supposed to listen? What for? What should we pay attention to? Raise their awareness of real life situations in which they use these strategies. Just as I did, right, some minutes ago with you, and we were talking about real life situations, right? It's very important to do that with students, because as we were saying earlier, right, yes, they do these things in Spanish, right? Or I don't know, yeah, they should be doing those things, but let's assume they do, right? Sometimes the problem is that they can't transfer this, right? And they expect to understand everything. So this is a very important thing, right? Awareness raising. Okay, when you're at the airport, you wouldn't pay attention to everything the man is saying, right? So why should you pay attention to every little thing here, right? Because that's when, you know, problems begin to appear, right? When they expect to understand everything and they get frustrated if they don't, right? Then discuss the strategies used, and they can walk you through their thinking. And I find this very, very useful, you know, after you've done the activity, right, with students, and you're discussing answers, right, before telling them, yes, I know, number 20, yes, letter A, right, they can ask you to, you can ask them to walk you through their thinking, right? Like, well, I chose letter A because when she said this or when she said that, right, and I was paying attention to this, or I was paying attention to everything, but then when she used this word, I started paying special attention, right? So
Veronica,
asking students to,
one
yes,
little comment, if it's okay.
Of course.
You know what I do before doing with them the listening? I go one by one and put the words that I think are going to be the clue words for them, because at the end of the listening you forget what they say. right? I mean, you don't remember clearly.
No.
And so I do that. I put it next to the answer, the words that I think is going to be like the clue words for them. And then I walk you through that. I walk them through it with those words. And then it's, oh, yeah, you're right. She said this or he said that.
Exactly.
To me, is the best way to show them, right, a little bit the path to follow, right?
Right. Yes, absolutely. That helps a lot. And you could even ask them to listen, you know, for a third time, but with this in mind, just jotting down, right, keywords or things that help them so that then they can walk you through their thinking. Yeah. And talking about their thinking process, you know, what they did to get to this answer is very useful because of two reasons. Well, first of all, for us teachers, right, to see what, you know, they were thinking or what they were doing, but also for them, because sometimes when they start talking about these things aloud, they say, yeah, but I got confused because of this, you know, so they start making sense of what they did and what they shouldn't have done and so on. So this is a very useful strategy. And then discuss what seemed to help and what didn't, right? And reflect on this, yes? And help students, you know, reach conclusions and see what they should continue doing and what they should change, right? And what they would like to do differently next time, right? And I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but it has happened to me with some students that sometimes they were aware of like the theory, let's say, of what they were supposed to do, yet when they started doing, you know, the activities, they wouldn't put into practice that strategy. They kept on doing exactly the same thing. I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say, right? So, and, you know, sometimes I would even discuss with students and say, okay, but if you're not very happy with how you're doing because this is what you have identified that you need to do differently, well, give it a try, right? Because remember that here what we're doing is creating a habit. We are instilling a habit. So sometimes that means getting rid of past habits, right? You know, sometimes this means unlearning certain things to learn new ways of doing things, right? So we are, after all, creating a habit. Daniel, you raised your hand. Go ahead. Daniel, are you there?
Sorry for being a nuisance. You know?
No, you're not. I enjoy all the comments and contributions.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I just wanted to say that sometimes an aspect that we don't have in mind is their anxiety when they are in front of a listening task, and because the exams tasks are so predictable, especially the longer ones in part 2 and part 4, I think that we should teach them, I mean walk them through the one first task ideally, to tell them that they always have time to listen, write. Obviously when they are writing they are not listening, and then and that these moments that they have you know, for writing are clearly signaled by the speaker with some things that relate to the question or the next question. This I found this to solve a lot of problems for some students.
Yes,
just that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Absolutely. Yes. Anxiety plays a very big role. And some of them have these, I don't know, strategies to deal with that, and others don't. And as we were saying at the beginning, they tune out. And that's, you know, a very big issue when they do. Yeah. Right. So, for example, thinking of these, of this thing of identifying the purpose, identifying the strategies that we should use, right? And, you know, making sure that the strategy we're using matches the purpose, right? Again, as you can see here, right? People are talking about their visit to a city. So again, the context, right? So what can we do, right? For example, we can, after activating schemata, after, you know, oh, sorry, press the wrong, there. So after activating schemata, helping students, you know, identify keywords, predict, blah, 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 right? We can focus on strategies. So will you hear exactly the same words? You know, will you hear, I don't know, for example, if you hear public transport system, okay, does that mean that that's the right option? Yes. What do you have to focus on? Right? What is it exactly that these options ask you to focus on? What will you do if you hear some of the words in the option? Again, does that mean that this is the right answer, right? Do you have to understand everything the speaker says? And then, you know, after they do the activity, right? Well, how did you do it? Walk me through your thinking, walk me through the strategies you used, right? Would you like to approach it differently next time? How? What would you like to do? What would you like to change, right? And even if this may become repetitive at times, as I was saying earlier, sometimes students, as I was saying, know the theory, right? How they should approach it, what they would do, what they have to do if, you know, when they're doing this part, what they have to focus on. But then when they are doing it, they resort to their old habits or old strategies or the wrong strategy. So raising awareness, as you can see, is key. Yeah. Something else that you can do, for instance, you know, with part 3 or any part, right, is what we call jigsaw listening, right? You can give students different parts of the recording, yes, for them to listen to, or you can ask them to listen for different purposes, right? Like, okay, Daniel, you listen and you listen for this, this, and that, and I don't know, Medium listens for this, this, and that, but they're listening to the same thing, right? And then, you know, they get together and they talk about what they have listened to, right? In order to raise their awareness of the fact that we have different purposes when we are listening, right? We don't listen to everything in the same way. For example, part 3 lends itself to this, because you can assign a speaker, you know, to different students. If you're working, I don't know, via Zoom, right, you can send them to breakout rooms. They hear all, you know, speaker 1, and then you assign them to different breakout rooms, and they get together with, you know, people who have listened to different speakers, right? You can have them paraphrase what they heard, right? So that you give them some practice in paraphrasing, right? And this can be done in class of a homework, right? And listening homework or you know, listening for homework is something that, I don't know, sometimes we forget about, right? And it's a very, very useful thing to do, right? It could be things that you give students or that students find, right? Because of course, the more practice they do, right? You know, practice makes perfect, right? So the more things they listen to, the more exposed they are, the better, right? And when they are, you know, doing this kind of listening for homework, right? Of course, we can ask them to do listening tasks like as if they were in the exam. But if we continue down this road of using the classroom as a lab to develop skills, right? You could give them different purposes to listen for, you know, to listen for, right? You could give them different purposes when listening, right, to these things. I don't know. For instance, you can ask students to, okay, listen to this, but while you are, I know, cooking at home, or when you're, I know, having a shower, when you're on your way to work, right? So it's also a good way of incorporating this habit of listening to different speakers, right? You know, incorporate it into their routines. Right. Now, Another thing that something that you've mentioned, and I said that we would deal a little bit later with that, and that I think it's very, very useful, and I know you will agree with me on that, because in fact, some of you were talking about this, is the importance of working with scripts, right? To help them identify not only these paraphrases, right, but also certain signals that sometimes they miss, right, because they are paying attention to other things, right? And, you know, more often than not, we get the scripts, right? Well, sometimes we don't, and I don't know, you decide if you would like to sit down and write it down. I wouldn't, right? I would, you know, do something different. But, you know, in general, we have access to the scripts. So, and there are lots and lots of things that we can do, you know, to exploit such a valuable resource. We can come up with paraphrase or restatement tasks or worksheets. Yes, I will show some of these things in a minute, right? But you can come up with your own, you know, exercises, right, in which you ask students to, okay, find a paraphrase or a restatement of this and that, right, to help them, you know, exercise this, right? Work on, I don't know, lexical fields, collocations, idioms, fixed expressions, right? Like, for example, I don't know, find an expression that means this, right? Or find something that means that, yes? Or I would even tell my students, okay, look for expressions or things that you would like to appropriate, that you would like to make your own, right? That you would like to, you know, steal this speaker, right? So, you know, awareness raising, right? And noticing, yeah, there. Work on discourse features. Okay, why does this person say this or that, right? What kind of idea do you think he or she is going to introduce after saying this? How does he or she hesitate? Why do you think she repeats this and that? So work on discourse features. Matching answers with the script, right? What we were saying, you know, earlier in terms of discussing, yes, what evidence, right, you have to support your answer. And then discuss distractors and wrong answers. That's a very, very important thing to do, right? And I think it's as important as checking the right answer, because discussing distractors, discussing wrong answers, yes, helps students understand, right, all these cues that they have that they may have missed out on, or that they have, I don't know, maybe not paid enough attention to. So discussing why answers are wrong is as important as discussing why answers are right. What can we do then? For instance, we have the listening paper, right? Part 4, right? If we analyze option B, which is the right answer, right? I would do this after, you know, we have finished doing the task, right? Not of a high enough quality, right? They have to look for the most common reason. So I would give them the script. Yeah, can give you a minute for you to read it. So I would ask my students, okay, what is the evidence for this, right? Why is it, what is B the correct one? Not of a high enough quality. And I would ask them to underline, right? And I would expect them to underline this. More often than not of the required standards. So here you have the paraphrase, right? And the evidence. And I would then go one step further and say, okay, let's look at letter A. The subject matter is unsuitable. This is mentioned in the text, right? Now, why is this wrong? Because remember, we're thinking of the most common reason. Well, because she says, or here, I don't remember, it might be, or sometimes, right? So this is more, you know, tentative language. So it's not really the most common reason. So here you're analyzing the script and raising their awareness of distractors, paraphrases, discourse features as well. Another thing that we can do with this thing in mind, right? You give them the script, in this case, just a part, right? And okay, find a paraphrase of giving background information about an artist, or find a paraphrase of what experts think of an artist's work, right? So you create the task, in this case, the activity, right? And you ask students to go through the script and find a paraphrase. Could be with the script, or ask them to listen again and find such paraphrases. And this is what you would expect them to come up with, right? What has influenced them, where they learn to paint, what the subject matter represents. This would be the paraphrase. What experts think of an artist's work. This would be the positive reviews. And if you look at the questions, right, these things come from the questions. Why does Rachel include a commentary, right? Gives background information, well, encourages people, tells people what experts think of the work. So here again, you're raising awareness of paraphrases. You're raising awareness of how things can be said in different ways. Right. And another thing that I would like to go over with you is what we were talking about some minutes ago in terms of this other process that we do to arrive at meaning, which is bottom-up processing. Remember we said that bottom-up processing is when we pay attention to the small things, when we pay attention to the tree instead of the forest, right? It's the ability to separate the stream of speech into a stream of words. It helps recognize divisions between words. More often than not, students say things like, well, as I was saying, I know he or she speaks as if he had a potato in his mouth, or sometimes they hear like a never-ending, stream of sounds, but they can't identify the boundaries of the word. That's when we realize that they have problems with this bottom-up processing. So what kind of work can we do to help students with this bottom-up processing? Yes. For example, after completing a normal listening activity, right? Or after doing all these things that, we were doing together, right? You can select a short phrase, right, from the recording and play that part only. And it has to be a very short phrase, right? It can't be the whole thing because, they will go crazy. But you select a short phrase and you play that part only, and you ask them to count how many words they hear. And then you go one step further and you say, okay, which words are stressed? Which words do you hear that are louder or that are, stronger? Why? Why do you think this is? What happens with the other words? So as you can see, this work has to do with bottom-up processing, with the small things, focusing on the small things that will help them arrive at meaning, make sense of what they hear. Let's do an example together. Yes. Sorry, what are you doing with this? Basically, what you're telling them is it's okay if you don't hear every word, because there will be certain words you won't hear because the speaker will unstress them. So what you're telling them is pay attention to keywords, the important words. So now, yes, let's do an example together. I'm going to play a phrase that I took from part 4. And I would like you to listen, and I would like you to count how many words you hear. All right? You can play it once or twice, right? So are you ready? Yes? Okay. So remember, you have to listen and count how many words you hear. All right? This one. Let's go one more time. Oops. So, how many words do you hear?
Sorry, but I couldn't hear actually.
No, I couldn't either.
Oh, okay. I know
really
why. I never shared the sound with you. So more of a listening activity. It was a guessing activity. Sorry, my bad. I share, you know, things, and I do this like 100 times a day, but I forgot. Sorry.
Don't worry, we all do.
Okay, let's pretend this never happened.
I thought perhaps as we are teachers, this will be really challenging.
This will be challenging, right? Give me just 1 second. Oh my God, I'm sorry. It's as if I started working with Zoom, I know, today. Sorry, 1 second. I was doing this to see if you were paying attention, you know, it's not that I made a mistake. Of course not. Okay, let's see. Right, so remember, you will listen to this short phrase and you have to tell me what?
How many words?
Exactly, right, so.
Firstly, you get to do a bit of everything.
Now you did hear it, right? Yes. Yes, okay.
Yes.
Let's go one more time.
Firstly, you get to do a bit of everything.
5.
5 words?
I heard 5.
7.
We have 5, 7, 9,
10.
10. If this were in writing, okay, we have 9, 5, 7. Okay. What does the phrase say?
You've got to do a bit of everything.
Okay, Mariela, right.
Yes.
Good. It's not so easy, right? Imagine students, yes, and that's, you know, this has to do with this bottom-up processing. This is what,
firstly, you get to do a bit of everything.
This is what you heard. Firstly, you get to do a bit of everything, right? Which is the part that you think students may find more difficult to understand? Listen again.
Firstly, you get to do a bit of everything.
To do a bit?
Right. This part, right? And this is because of what we were saying earlier today, you know, at the beginning. They will expect to hear a bit of, or, you know, of, if they don't know how to pronounce that word, right? And that's not what, you know, people will say. So this work with bottom-up, you know, processing is very important, right? Selecting a phrase, a very short phrase, and say, okay, if this was in writing, how many words would you write, right? How many words do you hear? And there will be some, you know, divergence, right? And then you can continue building from there. And you can say, okay, which words are stressed? Which words are stronger? Which words are louder? And then you can ask them why. For example, let's listen again. Which words are, you know, stressed?
Firstly, you get to do a bit of everything.
What do we have? Firstly, right?
Everything.
Right.
Firstly, get and everything.
Everything, right? She also stresses you because she's kind of hesitating there, right? But the words you mentioned are the ones that...
Firstly, you get to do a bit of everything.
Bit would also be stressed, right? But you know that there are different levels of stress as well, right? But let's not get into, right? Let's not get into that now.
Stress.
Exactly, yeah. Now, what is important is to help students identify that there are some things that are stressed and other things that aren't, right? And then ask them why, you know? And what I would do with my students is, give me 1 second, is the following, right? After I have identified, you know, which words are stressed, and which ones aren't, I would say, all right, good. So now, if I cover this, you know, the stressed words, right? These were the stressed words, right? If I cover them, do you understand any, do you have any idea? Can you understand? No, right? No. So why do you think, you know, this happens then? Why do people stress certain words? Well, because they are the important words, right? Give me, sorry.
In general,
yes.
we have to stress that those words who carry content.
Exactly, right? That carry meaning. Yes, or that are content words, right? So when you cover these words, right?
Firstly, you...
Oh my God, experiencing technical problems. So when you cover, right, the words that are important and you tell them, okay, what if, you know, you couldn't hear those words? Would you understand? No, right? But what if I covered, you know, you, to, a, of? Would you understand? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's what happens when you...
Maybe we can give them just the keywords and ask them to write a complete sentence to see
For
that
example,
they can do it.
That's a very good idea, right? Yes. Look at this. If I cover these words, do you understand?
Yeah.
You do.
Yes, and ask them to complete what are the missing words.
Exactly. So this helps a great deal, right? When it comes to raising awareness of why certain words are louder or stronger, right? Why certain words are stressed, because they carry meaning. So this is as if you were highlighting, you know, in writing, as if you were highlighting certain words. That's what we do when we speak. And that's what people do when they speak, you know, and that's what you should pay attention to. So the stressed words will be the important ones. And remember what we said at the beginning, that sometimes students think that they have to understand everything, right? So no wonder there are certain things you don't hear, because those are probably unstressed things that are not important. So this kind of bottom-up processing, this kind of work, right, raises their awareness, you know, in relation to this. It helps them become more aware. It helps them notice certain things. It helps them identify strong and weak forms. This will also help inevitably with their speaking as well. But well, that's another topic, that's another talk, right? Another webinar, not today, right? It helps them with stress and unstress, right? This contrast. That's how we convey meaning in English. This is a very difficult concept for us Spanish speakers, right? Because even though, of course, we do stress more certain things, right? We don't unstress, right? We don't have these reduced forms. We don't have a schwa, right? So that is quite a difficult concept for Spanish speakers. Right, and then, you know, don't forget about the follow-up, right? What Tere was saying earlier today, you know, this post-listening or after listening, right? We should help students, you know, reflect on what they have listened to and maybe, you know, relate this to another part of the exam. So if you were working with these bottom-up, you know, processing, speaking is what, I don't know, the natural logical thing to do next, right? So some final thoughts, right? Before we finish. Remember, strategies are very, very important, right? And all these things we were talking about today have to do with different strategies, right, that match different purposes. And being aware of what purpose I have for listening and being aware of what strategy I should use to match that purpose will lower anxiety. Knowing what to look for, knowing what the distractors are, right, will also lower anxiety. Knowing that I don't have to understand everything, will also help them lower anxiety, right? You know, I always tell my third TESOL students, you know, my methodology students, I will say, okay, do some therapy to students before you play the recording, you know, and say, okay, don't worry. Remember, there will be things you won't understand. There will be words you won't hear. It's okay. Focus on what you do hear and what you do understand, and focus on what you have to understand, you know, so that kind of therapy is always useful. Remember, the classroom is a lab, right? So we shouldn't use the class just for testing, right? And this is, I think, an important conversation to have with students, especially those students that, you know, expect to do nothing but practice tests. Set listening homework, as we said, you know, that's a good way of integrating listening into, you know, their lives. Combine top-down and bottom-up processes, as we were doing earlier, right? Especially the bottom-up processes, because this gives students more confidence, right? In fact, there's even research that has been done that shows that, you know, confidence levels increase, you know, when more attention is paid. I'm not saying forget about top-down processes, right? But when bottom-up processes, like this kind of work we were doing earlier, right, of the counting words and the stress and unstress, and there are lots of other things that you can do for bottom-up processes, but well, we didn't have enough time for that today. But there's research that you know, says that confidence is increased, right? And you know, students become more competent, right, listeners when they are able to combine the two processes, right? And then foster reflection, right? You know, and think of what you have done, how you did or how you approached this task. What would you like to do differently, right? And then the next time you do a listening activity, right, remind your students of this. Okay, remember that the last time we did this and that didn't go so well. So, and we said that you were going to do it. How? Okay, so let's give it a try. And remember, listening can be learned, right? And this is a very important reminder for our students, right? There are lots and lots of things to learn when it comes to listening, right? So it's not just play the recording and that's it, right? For example, at Dickens, we have like some sort of self-access center, you know, we call it TY, Teach Yourself, on Fridays. And I used to see some of my students, not all of them went to TY, but some of them did, you know, for extra practice. And I could see who was putting these things into practice and who wasn't, because I would ask them, okay, and what did you do? I don't know. And some of them would say, I did just one listening, but I spent 3 hours there, because they were analyzing all this and they were putting all these things into practice. And then I would get those students that said, yes, I spent 3 hours and I did, I don't know, all the listening tests that there were. So they were just, you know, covering, let's say, material. Right. So these are some links that Sophia will be sharing now with you. Yes, in the chat box, right? These are some of the resources that you can find in you know, these web pages, right? Resources from Cambridge Assessment English, right? You've got there lots of activities, lots of tips, lots of things to practice, right? Then there's a comment here. It's necessary for a facilitator to be well experienced and knowledgeable. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Right. So there you have, yes, these resources for you to check out. I'm sure you all know them, right? And then Sophia will also share this with you. Yes. This is Sophia will share a link, yes, where you can find this. This is like a sort of interactive picture. If you, I took a screenshot, so now it's not interactive anymore, but if you click on each of these things, you know, here or here or here or here, right? You get hyperlinks and it redirects you to the different websites where you can find all this. This is like a sort of support pack that, you know, Cambridge Assessment English has prepared for us free of charge, right? So, you know, I think it's very, very useful for all of us. I took some of these things, you know, from here, some of these materials from here, and you've got lots and lots of resources. Cambridge Assessment English is developing, I don't know if every day, but very often more and more resources, right? And free of charge. Most of them are. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity, right? And well, I don't know if you have any questions or anything that you would like to, I don't know, discuss or something that, I don't know, maybe wasn't clear enough.
Sorry, Vero, the links are in the chat box, okay?
Yes, thank you.
And maybe they can copy them or something because they lose them.
Right.
When they...
If not, don't worry, because what we can do is you will be getting the recording of the webinar, you and, you know, other people who weren't able to attend today. I don't mind including the links in the email. All right, I can do that.
Okay.
Yeah? Don't worry.
They are not in the chat, Sophie.
I copied them.
Okay.
Maybe like in previous comments.
Yes, in previous comments, but anyway, don't worry, because I can because Sophie, I don't know why you wrote to the waiting room.
Oh my God, okay. I'll
That's why. That's why.
This is when your brain turns off.
Thank you. All right, so here's the PDF. Can you see the PDF now?
Yes, Sophie, yes.
All right, and I'll copy the other links with the other activities just in 1 second.
Right. Thank you, Sophie. Anyway, I can share them in that email, right? And I will also share with you like a survey, yes, because we would love to hear your opinion, right? On the webinar and these series of webinars we are holding, right? And so I can include the links there.
Sorry, they're asking about the certificate of attendance.
Yes. We will be sending next week certificates of attendance, right? You will be receiving them from Andrea Mendez. She works in the International Exams Department, right? So you will be receiving all this, all right? And well, you know, thank you very much. You've been a great audience. Thank you for listening to me talking nonstop. But well, have I done a good job or not?
You were stopped and interrupt.
Look at the time. I didn't trust myself with timing, and yes, we did it. Now, but really, thank you very, very much.
Thank you,
everybody.
Thank you.
And well, hope this helps. And well, you know, I'm around if you have any questions or if there's anything I can help you with. Later today, you will be receiving an invitation to another webinar. We can't stop, you know, with webinars now. You will be receiving a webinar for next Friday, but in this case, a representative from Cambridge English Assessment will be, you know, delivering the webinar, and she will be sharing with us lots and lots of exciting news and resources that Cambridge has been developing for us. So not to be missed. Yeah, so you will be getting that invitation as well. All right, so well, thank you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And
Thank
well,
you.
Thank you for
see you
being
around.
here.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.